Hi guys, Steve from Patriot Bars here. Today, it's all about the go juice, aka coffee. So stay tuned. Regardless of what you call it, brew, a cup of joe, java, jet fuel, lifer juice, or here at Patriot Bars, we actually call it Zub, Z-U-B. Don't ask why, it's just what we call this, Zub. But regardless of what we affectionately call coffee, and in my case, I do mean affectionately because I love coffee. And you know, anyone who knows me or is familiar with my channels probably knows what a coffee fiend I am, as do all the employees of the local Starbucks, but you know, I digress. But today we're going to talk about whether or not coffee is actually good for you or maybe bad for you. Now, some will tell you that coffee's healthy, that it's an antioxidant, or that it's harmless, you know, especially if you drink it black, which for non-coffee drinkers, black coffee is slang for coffee without cream and sugar, just black coffee.
Always bet on.
Now, I've even heard well-respected doctors, you know, not quacks, say these kind of things, that coffee's harmless or even good for you. So the consensus among most of my fellow Americans, and probably most of the world in fact, is that coffee is not bad for you, you know, as long as you don't go crazy with it, of course. And you know, who am I to disagree? For I am no doctor, but you know, just the guy who owns Patriot Bars. But friends, if you're still with me, let me share my personal story about coffee with you. You know, a tale of woe, if you will. You know, see, I come from humble beginnings, shall we say. You know, not that I'm big time now or anything like that. But I remember when I first started drinking coffee, I was working in my uncle's machine shop. We were making grenade launchers and aircraft parts mostly, and I had, you know, repetitive, you know, non-technical, entry-level work to do there. You know, boring, repetitive stuff, because I was considered an unskilled worker at the time. It was about this time in my life that I started to heavily drink coffee. You know, before that, I drank a lot of pop, what we call soda here in the northeastern part of the United States. Most of the rest of the world just calls it soda. But let me tell you, there's something about having to do a lot of repetitive manual labor, like I was doing in my uncle's shop. It makes you really crave sugar and caffeine, and you know, and I would get that from drinking Mountain Dew while I was working, or Coke or Pepsi, you know, while I was eating my meals. Now, as most of you can probably recognize, I hope, you can see how unhealthy that is to drink all that much pop. But in my defense, I was a young active fella, and I worked out, and I was doing a lot of martial arts and sparring at the time. So I had high caloric needs, and I didn't really worry about what I ate and drank. You know, I just ate and drank. You know, we've all been there when we were younger, you know, I think. Eventually, I got to the point where I soured on the idea of continuing to drink so much pop, so much sugar. So, in a desperate need for caffeine, to make up for my poor sleeping habits at the time, you know, I turned to coffee. And it wasn't fancy stuff like this. I would just drink instant coffee, and at first it tasted like dirt to me, you know? And I guess that's why some call it mud. But what I would do is I'd mix about half a packet of Swiss Miss cocoa powder, most call it hot chocolate. I'd mix about half a packet of that in my coffee mug of instant coffee. You know, a poor man's mocha, if you will. And that's how I started. Half chocolate, half coffee, and it was pretty good. And I remember that coffee didn't make me feel too good at first, but you know, it tasted good because of the cocoa, and it gave me energy, or so I thought. Well, in any case, at that point I was hooked. But you see, guys, coffee doesn't really give you energy. Calories do. Coffee makes you produce more adrenaline. And that's where the temporary boost in energy comes from. But when it wears off, you get that coffee crash. And when I got my coffee crashes, I would just go get another cup of coffee or even more pop, because you know, I really wasn't able to quit that cold turkey by any means. You know, and fast forward a year or two, when I was no longer working at my uncle's shop, you know, I worked in a bar. It was often nighttime work. We'd come in at about 5 p.m. Bars in Michigan closed at 2 a.m. You know, then you still have to clean up after everybody leaves, all the drunks leave. And maybe if I was lucky, I would get home at 5 a.m. And if I had to work early the next day, which I sometimes did, I'd be lucky if I got 2 hours of sleep and then I have to get up and go back to work at the bar again, or the restaurant portion of the bar. You know, so my need for caffeine, or so I felt, was greater than it had ever been before. In desperation, I turned to, yeah, that's right, the dreaded Monster, energy drinks. I would drink anything I could get my hands on. Monster, Red Bull, Rip It. I don't even know if that one's still around, but I would pound down energy drinks. Because I was known as a hard worker and a high energy guy, and I wanted to keep that reputation up around my coworkers and friends. I didn't want to, you know, be low energy. I didn't want to be pooped out, you know. So I abused coffee and pop and energy drinks, and I even started to drink a little alcohol, which I didn't normally do. You know, justifying my excesses by saying, hey, you know, I work at a bar, you know, I have to be a high energy guy and a fun guy and all that.
That all your excuses are lies.
You know what, he's right. Because, you know, one night at the bar, I had a couple of drinks, alcoholic drinks, probably had a bunch of caffeine in my system as well. And I ended up making an ass of myself, offending a few friends and getting fired from the bar. Something to this day I regret. Now, I don't give a crap about being fired from the bar, but, you know, I said some mean things that I really didn't mean, that I didn't intend, to some really good people. And you know what they say, once words come out of your mouth, it's impossible to get them back in. It's like putting toothpaste back into the tube after you squeeze it out. It's just never going back in there. So I regret that, but, you know, moving on. Now, by this time, I'd gone back to school, taken a few classes at the university, and I enrolled at EMT school, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that acronym, it stands for Emergency Medical Technician. It's basically beneath paramedic, someone who works on an ambulance. And, you know, at first I was doing pretty well. I was still high energy, was still hardworking and motivated, you know, and I'd resolved to give up energy drinks and never touch beer again. But I was hitting the coffee harder than ever before, drinking massive amounts of it in the morning and skipping breakfast on most days. You know, and I ran into another big problem. You see, I've always suffered from car sickness, or motion sickness as some of you may call it. You know, a queasy, uneasy feeling when you're riding in a vehicle as opposed to driving. And as I'm sure you can deduce, my assignment as an EMT, basically an ambulance crewman, he had me sitting, you guessed it, in the back of the ambulance, getting so car sick and nauseous that I always thought I was gonna puke, like every minute. And you know, having coffee only for breakfast, it was making the situation much worse. I was essentially drinking my meals, the only calories being like from the cream of the coffee. But you know, this didn't occur to me at the time, and so I turned to motion sickness pills in a vain attempt to keep working on the ambulance. Which I didn't even enjoy doing, by the way, but you know, I didn't want to fail twice in a row, getting fired from yet another job.
You are fine.
And I think you can see where this story's going. Over-caffeination, failure to eat regular meals, and those blasted pills, well, they caused my health to deteriorate, to really go downhill. You know, I was indeed let go from the ambulance job, and by this time I had a pretty severe case of adrenal fatigue. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with adrenal fatigue, it's basically like burnout on steroids. And for those of you who have been burnt out, you know that it can really kick the crap out of you, really destroy your energy levels. You know, I barely got off the couch for about 8 months or so. You know, I felt so weak and tired, you know, but I was continuing my education by taking online courses, you know, to pass the time while I slowly recovered. And eventually, indeed, I did recover, you know, and during that time when I was, you know, down and out, you know, I resolved to make exercise equipment. So, you know, the seeds of Patriot Bars were planted, so to speak. So, you know, I guess some good came of it. After that, years of school and training followed, a few anyways. And although I did give up Mountain Dew and energy drinks, you know, I kept drinking coffee. See, you know, coffee, pop, any drink containing caffeine, even black and green tea. Well, they're all stimulant drinks. They're all uppers. I like to call them stim drinks. anything with caffeine. You know, I kept going with the stim drinks, mostly coffee, for some time. I would constantly drink something caffeinated, mostly coffee, throughout the day, and I would always justify it because of the increase in energy that it gave me. But this would in turn suppress my appetite. It would cause me to skip meals, you know, just snack around throughout the day, not eat enough protein. And then at night, when I couldn't go on like that anymore, you know, when the work was finally over, I'd eat a big dinner. And I'd have an adrenal crash right after, often even falling asleep right after, you know, my last meal of the day. So like, you know, so it was bad. You know, and I didn't wise up. I kept going like this. 99% of the time, I wouldn't drink pop. I haven't touched energy drinks or alcohol in years. But despite many attempts to cut down on coffee and to quit coffee, I really didn't. See, I love coffee. I love the taste of it, and I love how alive and motivated it makes me feel at first when I drink it. You know, I convinced myself that I couldn't live without it and that I didn't even want to live without it. You know, and I drank every kind, from, you know, Folgers Crystals to Keurig to, you know, to pour overs, you name it. And I drank it. And I'm well known and greeted by name at the local coffee shop. And you know, I'm talking to my Dutch friends here. Just to be clear, when I say coffee shop, I mean a place to buy coffee, not wacky weed. You know, I would never touch marijuana, cannabis, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. I've never touched it. But, you know, if you do, I mean you no offense. But, you know, when you think about it, honestly, in America, there's no one good term for a place to buy coffee. Coffee house, coffee spot, we don't really use these terms, you know. Seriously, there's no real word for dedicated place to buy coffee other than coffee place, I guess. But, you know, I'm getting off track here. You know, seriously guys, back to the pot. Smoking pot can seriously erode your effectiveness in all areas of life. You know, and I'm not judging, mind you, but it can deteriorate your health bit by bit. See, a buddy of mine, he used to be the hardest working guy that I knew. He was a real badass. And, you know, well, he started smoking pot, or maybe more pot, when it got legalized here in Michigan a while back. And honestly, he seems worse for wear because of it. You know, less energy, less motivation, and less physically fit. So, you know, honestly, I recommend that you don't touch that shit. But, you know, anyways, back to coffee. You know, coffee and other stimulant drinks, they can significantly raise cortisol levels, probably due to the activation of your fight or flight response. See, your sympathetic nervous system stays activated and you stay in fight mode, and you don't go into rest and digest mode, which is where you want to be most of the time. You know, and this is very bad from an athletic standpoint as well, because it can inhibit muscle gain and it can promote fat storage. And this is true whether or not you're a man or a woman. Elevated cortisol levels can wreck your health in many ways, and they say they can even prematurely age you. In other words, you look older and feel older than you actually are. So coffee in some individuals, as has been said or even proven, to increase cortisol. So you gotta watch out for that. Now, I'm gonna give you a list of symptoms that I personally experienced countless times that I now attribute to coffee consumption. Jitters, temper flare-ups, paranoia, just a negative attitude in general, trouble falling asleep at night, and then, as you might expect, trouble waking up in the morning, feel exhausted in the morning, energy surges after the coffee, and then crashes after the caffeine runs out of my system. Reduced cardiovascular endurance because my heart is beating too fast if I drink coffee before cardio. Reduced muscular strength, probably for the same reason. Cramps while performing abdominal exercises, especially.
It hurts, and I'm dying.
Cracked skin, chapped lips, constant cravings for more coffee, cravings for sugary foods if I happen to put cream in my coffee, because there's some sugars in milk and cream, you know, half and half. Trouble losing the last bits of fat. You try to lose fat and it takes down your muscle because your cortisol's jacked up. Reduced appetite, therefore leading me to not eating enough protein. Depression, especially at nighttime before bed. Even embarrassing stuff like excessive urination.
We have to establish a pee
or
corner.
Feeling like you need to pee when you don't really have to pee that bad, and even diarrhea. Well, we're gonna leave it at that, folks. Now, I have a feeling that some people will be smashing that dislike button because of the controversial nature of what I'm saying. You know, insulting what is quite possibly their favorite beverage, coffee. But remember, guys, coffee's my favorite beverage too. And remember, there are genetic factors involved here. They say that some people are more affected by coffee and caffeine than others. You know, our genes are what they are, and just because I have problems with coffee doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad in general. But the point that I'm trying to make is that if you are experiencing or have experienced any weird symptoms like I have, you know, then maybe take a look at your coffee consumption. It might be the culprit. Only you know. Here we are. As I'm filming it, it's just past 5:30 on January 3rd, 2025. And my New Year's resolution was to indeed beat coffee in my addiction to coffee once and for all, my addiction to caffeine. You know, and I didn't do so good today. You even saw me drink some coffee at the beginning of this video. But you know what? I tell you what, guys. I may be down, but I'm not out. I'm still in this fight, and I intend to win. If coffee makes me, not necessarily you, but me, if it makes me weaker, if it makes me sicker, then eventually it's going to destroy me and take down Patriot Bars. I'll tell you what, that ain't going to happen, folks. I'm going to keep fighting the good fight here and try my best to be as healthy as I can in 2025. And I hope that you will do the same with whatever struggles you may be having. And to anybody, you know, who's stuck with me through this fairly boring video this far, let me say I appreciate you. I wish you a happy and prosperous 2025, and maybe I'll see you in the next video. And to my friends at Starbucks, I'm going to miss you guys, and I wish you the best.